As the Bruins roster takes shape, they might be a bit better than they were last season, but they could also very well still be in lottery contention.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Thursday, July 3rd. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins your first listen every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's podcast, we are discussing the changes the Bruins have made in recent days, weeks, months, dating back to the trade deadline, and trying to take a look at whether this team is any better than they were last season. So we're going to look at the forward group, defense, goaltending to try to make that assessment. They might be a bit younger, deeper, built for speed, but they've sacrificed some of the veteran leadership that certainly defined last year's group. If Jeremy Swayman holds strong and players like Mason Lohrei, Casey Middlestadt, maybe Marat Husnudina rise, this team could be better than the one that finished dead last in the East. But if some of these bets don't pay off, it could be another frustrating year, and there's still some uncertainty facing this team. Let's not kid ourselves. But before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. That's on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. You can find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I'm a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL for various outlets for about 20 years now. Let's kick things off up front, shall we, where some of the biggest changes on this team have taken place. If you look back to the opening night projections for last year, you had Pavel Zacha playing with Elias Lindholm, David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand with Charlie Coyle and Morgan Geeky, Trent Frederick, Matt Poitras, Justin Brazeau, and don't forget, we had Tyler Johnson around, John Beecher, Mark Kastelik. It took a while for Johnson to join the group, but that was kind of the talent that we were working with here last season. This group was leaning on veteran presence, Marchand, Coyle bringing 1,600 plus combined NHL games to the table. They were hoping for some two-way structure from Lindholm, Coyle, even Frederick, and emerging talent like Matt Poitras, who was the breakout story season before that, before being injured and kind of taking a step backwards that way. This year, this is the forward projections that we have for opening night in October. We have Morgan Geeky with Elias Lindholm and David Pastrnak. That's the version of the top line that we have right now based on how they clicked down the stretch. We did have Pavel Zacha skating at the center spot for quite some time with David Pastrnak, but he was replaced later on by Lindholm. Lindholm's being paid like a number one center, and that line was clicking to end the season. So that very well should be your number one line. And again, Lindholm needs to adapt to those guys as well in order to form that. If he can play to the level of those two guys from last season, and if Geeky can maintain his scoring production, that could be a very nice first line for the Bruins. But it depends on Geeky sustaining that success from last season. Talked many times about how his shooting percentage was elevated, likely to regress. Even if he gets 25 goals, that's still not bad for your first line left winger. Elias Lindholm needs to be responsible defensively and either play decoy or help set up either two of those wingers. Pastrnak just has to be who he is as the lone star player on this team, forward-wise anyways. The second line, It's likely going to be Pavel Zacha with Casey Middlestadt and newly acquired Victor Arvidsson. On the third line, Marat Hustnudinov. On the left side, probably Sean Corrali in the middle. We'll talk about that in a second. Tanner Jeannot on the right side. You could perhaps have Michael Eyssimont up on the third line as well. John Beecher, Mark Kastelik in the mix for the fourth line. But don't forget, there's also Matej Blumel, Alex Steeves, Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov in the mix. Speaking of those guys, we've talked about the youth movement perhaps being blocked by the signings of Corrali, Eyssimont, both Matt Poitras and Fraser Minton, as well as Fabian Lysell. They're all waiver exempt, meaning they can start the season in Providence without having to go through waivers. That's not the case with Blumel. That's not the case with Steeves. And so those guys could have the upper hand when it comes to starting on opening night with the Boston Bruins. And that kind of sucks. We would love to see Fraser Minton, Matt Poitras, at the very least, up with the Bruins. Don Sweeney has said they're going to have to bounce one of those veterans or fight for that right to play on opening night when it comes to training camp. Morgan Geeky, of course, now seemingly a fixture on the top line wing after that breakout season. Early on last year, though, he was often scratched. He wasn't getting the job done. So again, they're kind of banking on him at least finding some semblance of that form again or keeping that going. Lindholm, Pastrnak staying together for continuity. Lindholm did have a nice showing at the World Championships, a solid finish to the season. And I think when I talk about that leadership void up front, Lindholm, with Coyle and Marchand gone, I believe will step up and become more of a leader on the team, not a leaner. Second line is going to depend a lot on whether or not Casey Middlestadt can find his previous form where he had 50-plus point seasons. Buffalo, Colorado. He is a former 8th overall pick. So there is pedigree there. There is offensive upside. Victor Arvidsson, when healthy, still brings 20-goal upside there as well. But you're, again, banking on best case scenarios from both of those two guys, with Zacha shifting to the wing to complement those two guys who can certainly score. Zacha needs to bring some of that scoring as well. There is a lot of options when it comes to the bottom six. Mikey Eyssimont brings pace, pestiness. John Beecher, Mark Kastelik, anchor a line built for forechecking, D-zone starts. Again, Poitras, Minton, Lysell can be sent to Providence without risk of being claimed. That's not true for some other guys like Corrali, Eyssimont, Merkulov even, Steeves, Blumel. So it's quite likely that a couple of those guys at least will start in Providence. Merkulov, Corrali, Eyssimont, even the two AHL standouts from last season would have to go through waivers, and those two guys specifically, Blumel, Steeves, would likely be claimed because they have some upside and the Bruins scoop them on very nice low-cost deals. So that could lead to some tough roster calls, even if the kids outplay the vets in camp. And that's kind of the logjam that the Bruins have created by investing in these bottom six guys to begin free agency here. By investing in Corrali, Eyssimont, Jeannot. These are all players who could block out Minton, Poitras, Lysell. And that's unfortunate because this team needs to score goals. Yeah, Jeannot can hit like nobody else. But the fact is the Bruins need goals. And the best chance of doing that is by putting out the guys with the most offensive upside, and that's not Jeannot. Corrali, Esimont could pop in the occasional goal, but still, I would rather have Minton, Poitras, even possibly Lysell in the lineup. The Bruins are deep because of that internal competition, but there's a lot riding on sustained success from Geeky, breakout in black and gold performance from Casey Middlestadt, Victor Arvidsson remaining healthy, Elias Lindholm riding that chemistry with David Pastrnak, as well as that performance from the World Championships. And of course, David Pastrnak remaining one of the best forwards in the NHL. That's the least of my worries. When it comes to whether or not the forward core is better than they were last year, I mean, it's quite possible that you could make that argument. They're faster, deeper, more versatile, and I think that it's quite possible you can make an argument that they are better than they were last year. The third line has higher ceiling, especially if Husnudinov or Minton pop. 24 was a bit safer with experience from Trent Frederick. 2025, second line. If you look at Marchand, Coyle, Geeky to start, maybe Zaka, Middlestadt, Arvidsson now, if healthy. More offensive upside, but of course, you're losing out on that leadership that you had from Marchand and Coyle. Anyways, that's a look at the forwards. Let's take a look at the defense core here as the podcast continues. Do you ever wish managing your money felt a bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. If you've looked at your spending and been surprised by how fast it speeds up, like in terms of streaming services or eating out, Monarch Money can help take full control of your finances. All you have to do is use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's take a look at the defense. Now, last year you had projected defense pairings of Nikita Zadorov, Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo, Mason Lohrei, Andrew Peeke. This year, not too different in terms of personnel. The big change is having Henri Jokiharju instead of Brandon Carlo, and then the depth options are Jordan Harris and Victor Soderstrom. Mason Lohrei could step up on the top pairing with Charlie McAvoy, and I know what you're thinking. He had the worst plus minus in the NHL. Why would you put him on the first pairing with Charlie McAvoy? But that's exactly why. Lohrei has size, vision, offensive upside, and if you put him with the team's best defenseman, then you should be able to mitigate those plus minus numbers and have a more effective player overall, learning from your team's best player. It's a lot to ask for the young D-man to take on top pair minutes nightly, and you could very well see Zadorov swap up there when it comes to key defensive situations, but that's how it looks right now. Carlo out, Jokiharju in. Brandon Carlo was one of Boston's most defendable stay-at-home defensemen. Jokiharju is a downgrade defensively, to be sure, but he brings better skating, puck movement, and could be a nice complement to either Zadorov or Lindholm. And in fact, Zadorov and Jokiharju looked pretty good when it came to playing together late last season after the trade deadline. Zadorov peak could be a potential Bash Brothers, a third pair that hits everything, plays physical, maybe struggles with transition and puck retrieval, and they'll likely be deployed in defensive zone and PK situations. Jordan Harris is a smart, mobile defenseman who can slot in on either side. Soderstrom, former first rounder with upside if he finds consistency. And the Bruins kind of lacked this level of plug and play when it came to defense last season. Strengths: modern pairing for Mason Lohrei and Charlie McAvoy. Lohrai's offensive instincts complement McAvoy's all-around game. But of course, Lohrei is still developing defensively and could be exposed against top lines. On the second pairing, Jokiharju brings more puck moving upside than Carlo did. Lindholm very much still a defensive anchor. Jokiharju, though, has been inconsistent and doesn't bring Carlo's defensive presence. So maybe a bit of a downgrade when it comes to last year. Third pairing, if you have Zadorov and Peak, extremely physical, great for defensive zone starts and matchups versus bottom six opponents. A very punishing pair, but puck retrievals and zone exits could be an issue. The Bruins maybe deeper than they were last year. Harris could push for regular rotation. And when it comes to comparing the defensive group from last year to this year, it's perhaps a more modern, deeper, and future-oriented look, especially with Lohrei moving into the top pair, Jordan Harris pushing for a spot. Lindholm Carlo was a better shutdown unit. Zadorov McAvoy could have brought a nastier edge. And the reality here is that while the blue line is shifting towards youth and puck movement, swapping Carlo for Jokiharju is a bit of a risk, but they're getting quicker and more skilled over kind of brute shutdown force. The bet is on Lohrei evolving into a legit top pair guy next to McAvoy. If he does, the decor could quietly be much improved, but if he falters, then you might have to put Zadorov on the top pair with McAvoy or try Harris up there and bump Lohrei back down to a more depth role where he's more sheltered. The key to all this, of course, is health. And the big problem last year for the Boston Bruins was Charlie McAvoy getting injured, Hampus Lindholm getting injured, and Nikita Zadorov, Andrew Peak, Mason Lohrei being forced into much heavier minutes than expected, while calling on like Michael Callahan, who's still around, or Ian Mitchell, Parker Witherspoon to lock down the bottom three. So the key here is health. And if the Bruins are healthy, there will obviously be better defensively than they were last year. Losing Hampus Lindholm for the entire season was a major detriment to this team. Losing Charlie McAvoy down the stretch certainly did not help. And if you put those two back anchoring the top two pairs, you could have Lindholm Peak, where Peak kind of takes that on that Carlo role, Lohrei McAvoy, and then you could have Zadorov Jokiharju as your third pair, which might not be too bad. And then Harris Soderstrom able to rotate in and out as needed. Overall, is it a better defense than last year? Well, it's hard to say because last year, of course, there were those major injuries. The one major change is Jokiharju for Carlo, which defensively might not be the best thing, but as a whole, when healthy, the group should be a bit better and help the goaltending, which was a problem last year and which we will discuss here as the podcast continues. So overall, we're kind of trending towards the Bruins being a bit improved over last year's group. The defense deeper, more dynamic, but a little more volatile too. The forwards, arguably faster, also deeper, but there's a lot riding on breakout performances and internal competition. When it comes to goaltending, it should be stable. You had last year Jeremy Swayman as the number one starter, Joonas Korpisalo as the backup. That will, for now, remain intact. Swayman, though, is on a long-term deal, which was signed last September. It kept him from having a full training camp and kept him out of opening night. But now with a full year as the starter, a much more relaxed offseason, he should come in looking more like the Jeremy Swayman that we have seen in the past. And he displayed that ability at the World Championships. Korpisalo still under contract, played okay last year, but was pretty vocal about wanting to play more. And not quite the rosy relationship that Swayman and Linus Ullmark used to have. And then, of course, there's Michael DiPietro, who's coming off an excellent AHL season, no longer waiver exempt either. So they could carry 3 goalies to start the season unless they make a trade for Joonas Korpisalo through the offseason, which might be ideal because you would get some more cap flexibility and also eliminate that discontent and reward Michael DiPietro for that excellent AHL season. But regardless of who the backup is, the Bruins will only go as far as Jeremy Swayman can take them. It's truly his net. That Ullmark safety net is gone. We can write off last season as being just crazy all around for the whole team, including Swayman. And he needs to be that guy in order for the Bruins to be better. So when you look at Swayman and Korpisalo from last year compared to this year, Swayman has to be better. He can't frankly get any worse than he was last season. He's being paid to be a number one goalie in the NHL, just outside the top 5 in terms of salary, and he needs to be that guy. DiPietro no longer waiver exempt, so if he's sent down, another team would scoop him. If he outperforms Korpisalo in preseason, could face a tough call. Trade or waive Korpisalo. Trade would be the easiest thing. They could waive him, carry 3 goalies, risk losing DiPietro. They're not going to do that. It's a good problem to have, but one that could force Sweeney's hand. Overall, though, the Bruins should be better in net just by Jeremy Swayman being more comfortable as the number one starter, not having that contract drama hanging over him, and with a healthy Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm anchoring the defense. So is this team better than last year? The Bruins finished dead last in the Eastern Conference, so they can't get much worse. The goaltending, not up to par. Defensive injuries. Some guys up front who did not perform like they had a year ago, including Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle. And they could not generate enough offense, nor have a sufficient defense to support the goaltending. You can make an argument that the forward depth is improved despite losing Trent Frederick, Charlie Coyle, Brad Marchand, the big one. But don't forget that Coyle had fallen off a bit offensively, or quite a bit actually. Brad Marchand's regular season production had been steadily going down over the past 3 seasons. You're banking on Victor Arvidsson having a good season, Casey Middlestadt becoming that 50-plus point guy, and Morgan Geeky, Elias Lindholm, David Pastrnak sticking as the number one line. The forward depth overall is improved. There's internal competition. they're perhaps faster and more mobile. And young players like Geeky, Lori, Middlestadt. Well, Geeky and Middlestadt not very young anymore, but Lori, Husnudinov, Minton, Patra, maybe Lysel, Merkulov, all have room to grow and will be pushed by Esimont, Corrali, Jeannot, Steves, and Blumel. The veteran leadership, though, is gone. Marchand, Coyle, Carlo. The penalty kill might suffer with Carlo gone, and waiver dynamics could hold better players in the AHL. So this team has a bit of a higher ceiling, perhaps, but also a lot of uncertainty. And the key will be internal development, especially on whether Lori can become a legit top 4 defenseman. Casey Middlestadt getting back to his kind of career seasons with Buffalo and Colorado. If you look at what he was able to achieve previously in his career as the 8th overall pick in 2017, he had a 57-point season in 2023-24 between Colorado and Buffalo. He also had a 59-point season in 2022-23 with the Buffalo Sabres, 0.72 and 0.71 points per game, respectively. 59, 58 points in full seasons. Last year dropped to 40 points, which is one of the reasons why he was traded. But if he can get back to that form that he had just 2-3 seasons ago, then the Bruins will certainly benefit from having him as their second line center. A lot of people writing him off already, but I think there's some real upside there. One of, or two or three of Patra, Mint, and Lysel could force their way into a full-time role, but all three could easily find themselves in the AHL. The Bruins could be better than they were last season. Should be better than they were last season, just based on health, Swayman, and a forward group that is faster, deeper, and the Bruins kind of prioritizing being harder to play against with the additions of Jeannot, Esimont, Corrali. The real question, though, is the Bruins good enough to make the playoffs? They finished dead last in the East in 2025 here. They've overhauled much of the roster. It's fair to ask, is it enough? If you realistically look at opening night last year versus opening night this year, you think last year they had beaten Toronto, advanced to the second round. They had made additions, Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, seemingly built for the playoffs, and then they end up last in the East. Is it enough now, the changes they've made, to get back to playoff contention? There's reasons to believe. Jeremy Swayman gives them a high-level goaltender. The forward group is deeper and faster, especially if Middlestadt gets back to his production. Morgan Geeky sustains his. Guys like Husnudinov or Minton or Patra take a step. Lori, more protected, could be having more of a breakout moment. The defense has more depth, and internal competition could force everyone to bring their best. But there's a clear leadership void. Brad Marchand, Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo gone. No clear, real number one scoring line unless Lindholm and Pasternak continue to click with Geeky. They're relying heavily on bottom six depth, and Patra, Minton, Lysel could be good enough to play, but might not start the year in Boston because of that waiver conundrum. And of course, Henry Jokiharju replacing Carlo, that could be a miss as well. If everything clicks, and that is a big if, this team could be a wild card contender. The Atlantic is tough. The Metro isn't getting any easier to compete with in terms of wild cards. If injuries pile up, which is always a question mark for every team. The kids aren't ready, or some of the new signings just completely bottom out. And if Geeky can't refine his form, Middlestadt doesn't find his previous success, they could spend another year in the basement. 25, 26 Bruins aren't a lock for anything. They're a bit more interesting. With a full year of Swayman playing elite level hockey, getting his save percentage above 900, hopefully back to like 910. More skilled forward group, young talent ready to break through. There's at least reason to believe again. And of course, James Higgins could arrive as early as the end of this season. That's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Are they a playoff team? Not guaranteed. They should be better than they were last season, closer than they were last season, and we'll continue to break this team down here on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast each and every day. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode, and we will continue to encourage you to check out the Locked On NHL podcast for league-wide storylines. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll talk again tomorrow right here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.